Should persecuted Christians leave or stay in the Middle East? Now, it's very hard to keep track of numbers in the region, but in Iraq alone, in the last 20 years, the number of Christians has decreased by over 70%. On the one hand, why shouldn't they leave if their lives are in danger? But on the other hand, could you imagine a holy land without Christians? Could you imagine a Bethlehem without a Sister Sophie? Bethlehem has changed a bit in the last 2,000 years, but for Sister Sophie, providing a safe creche or cradle for a baby is rooted in that one manger of so long ago. There are so many abandoned children in Bethlehem. Sister Sophie takes them all. She runs La Crèche, the orphanage of the Holy Family. It was inspiring to be there. Our group was happy to spend some time on the floor playing. Sister Sophie and her staff feed and clothe the children. They give them a home, but nothing is better than a new group of playmates. 2,000 years ago, there was another baby that was lying in a different creche, not too far away from this place. Today, Sister Sophie has found a way to honor that baby by honoring and caring for today's abandoned children of Bethlehem. Joining me now to talk about some of the issues that Christians face in the Middle East are Michael La Civita. He's the Vice President Communications for CNEWA CNEWA. And with him is Carl Hetu. He's the Director for CNEWA Canada. So welcome you both. CNEWA, C-N-E-W-A, Catholic Near East Welfare Association. Michael, what is that?
Catholic Near East Welfare Association was founded in 1926 to work by Pope Pius XI, to work with Eastern Christians throughout the Middle East, Northeast Africa, India, and Eastern Europe.
Okay, so it's not specifically Christians in the Middle East.
No, the agency is much broader than that. It's anywhere where the Eastern churches are present. So here in Canada, we have done plenty of projects over the years, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, Sweden, wherever they're present.
Okay, so and I was going to ask Carl then, I'm glad you brought it up, so why would there be a national director in Canada for this association in the Middle East?
Well, there is two national offices. There is one national office in the United States, and there is one national office in Canada. And we even have the possibility of developing a CNEWA also in Australia and in Italy.
But the logic being...
But the logic is our role is to do education and fundraising, but also to really reach out to the Catholics in the West about the reality of the East. Okay. And so my mandate, particularly here in Canada for the last, since 2005, since we opened our office here, so about 6 years ago, is really to introduce the life, the culture, the history, the connectivity between the Eastern Christians in the Middle East, India, Eastern Europe, and Canada, and how they can do something to support.
Right. So you're in the office in Canada. You're in the office in the United States.
In New York. It's a rather odd thing. We're a Vatican agency that the popes decided to center in the United States in 1926 for a variety of reasons. We've always had Canadian donors as well as European donors, but our administrative center is in New York.
Okay. Now, I kind of alluded to numbers with the introduction, but do we know more or less the number of Christians is that a fair question if we're looking at Christians in the Middle East?
It depends on what you define as the Middle East. The Vatican had a synod, the Pope in October brought bishops from the Middle East, and it was interesting to see how the Vatican defined the Middle East. Historically, in fact, our agency, we've always worked in Lebanon and Syria and Jordan, Israel, Palestine. That's basically for Iraq,
Egypt.
That Egypt. Well, we've always considered that part of Northeast Africa.
Okay.
And the Vatican did something that was much broader than that. They considered Turkey part of the Middle East. They considered Iran a part of the Middle East. They considered Egypt a part of the Middle East, and then all of the countries of the Persian Gulf. When you factor those communities or those countries into the Middle East and those churches, you have a much broader demographic than what is historically understood as, the old-fashioned Middle East.
But is it possible to even estimate?
There are about 16 million Christians in what the Vatican...
those countries that you've outlined.
Yes. So we have the Patriarchate of Jerusalem, which embraces the churches of Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and Cyprus. The Patriarchate of Alexandria, which... So it's the church is much broader. Greek Catholic, Roman Catholic, Maronite, Greek Orthodox. You have at least 20-some different varieties.
Right, Chaldeans or Syriacs.
Armenians.
What's important to mention that people confuses a lot, especially out west, is we believe that because they are Eastern churches, they are all Orthodox. And over the last 200 years or so, there's been many churches that have broken or separated for all kind of reasons, some political, some spiritual, some theological, and going back. For example, the Assyrian Church of Iraq became part of a big branch, became the Chaldean Church, and communion with Rome. The Melkite with the Greek Orthodox. Same thing with the Coptic Orthodox, Coptic Catholics. A lot smaller churches, though, very small churches.
Right.
But they all are in communion with Rome, and they do have actually a place where they can gather in the Holy See called the Congregation of Eastern Churches, which is very unknown.
So you have the whatever 21 or 22 Eastern Rites, they're Christian in communion with Rome. Then the Orthodox churches who are also Christian.
They're variants. They're
exactly.
non-Catholic,
but then we also have
rites.
Christians who are Protestants or evangelicals who are there. They're
Anglicans, Lutherans, Pentecostals. Yes.
Okay, yeah, because when we were there, I had a chance to go with you last year, and not all Christians were Arabs. I mean, they're Arabs, but...
Well, in Israel, if you speak about the church in Israel, it's actually growing. It's because you have a large number of migrant workers coming in from Ethiopia, from the Philippines, exactly. Yes. So you have different varieties of communities now.
Yeah, so it's not fair to kind of talk about Christians as one group.
Exactly.
It's very... let me read you a comment. We posted this question on Facebook, and here is a comment from Harrison Eyre. He's in British Columbia, and he says, should persecuted Christians leave or stay in the Middle East? Their desire to stay or go is entirely up to them. Some people may very well be called to stay and witness to their faith so that the seeds of their faith and perhaps martyrdom can bear fruit in building the church in their areas. Some, on the other hand, ought to leave if it be the will of God for them. Regardless of their decision, it is our Christian duty to aid them in their decision. So he brings up a few different points, and I'd be happy if you want to comment on anything that he said, but are all Christians in the Middle East persecuted? Maybe that's the first question.
That's the first thing that strikes me in all of this is what is persecution, if it happens, where it is happening.
Yes.
And there's a lot of discernment to be made.
Well, all we hear in the news here is, explosion 2 weeks ago, church in Egypt, Coptic church, persecuted Christians in Iraq. That's what we hear in the news, but that's not the reality.
It's because because there's one explosion. Does it mean that all the Christians in Egypt are being persecuted? And who is persecuting?
Yeah.
And is it ingrained into a devious, evil plan to get them out of there? No. Okay. There's no such a plan. Wherever I've traveled across Canada, people are asking me about the plan. I said, there is no plan.
Right.
There is a fueling historical, cultural things that happens like in Egypt or in Syria or other places that at times will boil over land, over a Muslim daughter and the Christian son that wants to marry.
Right.
It's as simple as that sometimes. But there are other places where, when the invasion took place in 2003 in Iraq, they destroyed the political structure of Iraq and created anarchy in that country, impunity. Right. And radical forces attacked the most vulnerable, the Christians. And in that case, is it really persecution, or it's taking advantage of a weak minority where the Christians did not belong to political parties or militia? And that's what happened. Not only you have the, I would say, the Islamist force, or simply thugs, criminals that attacked Christians. So we have to be very careful when we talk about persecution. Is there discrimination? Certainly, in pretty much everywhere. Is there harassment? In some places. Okay. But let's be careful with persecution.
First of all, the Middle East is not monolithic. Islam is not monolithic. Just like there are so many different varieties of Christianity, there are so many different ethnic groups and different values that make up Canada or North America, the same is true of the Middle East. Nothing is monolithic. There are just plenty of variety. And as a result, I think, Carl, you stated it very, very well. There is no great plan to drive anybody out. Maybe in some Islamicist's mind, he'd like to drive these people out. I think what's fundamental, however, is that Christians are, what we have here is really a fundamental lack of understanding between the West and the East. They misunderstand the West misunderstands the Middle East.
Yeah, so you're talking about a cultural difference. I want to get back to that. We're going to take a little break, but it's a very, very short break. We're going to continue this conversation, and in particular, we're going to meet some wonderful Franciscan sisters in Amman who are working with Iraqi refugees in Jordan. So stay tuned.
Let us know your perspective. Email us at perspectives@saltandlighttv.org or reach us by mail. Perspectives at Salt and Light Television, 114 Richmond Street East, Toronto, Ontario, M5C 1P1. Or call us toll free at 1-888-302-7181. Let your perspective be heard.
It's a regular Saturday at the home of the Franciscan Missionaries of Mary in West Amman. Dozens of Iraqi refugees gather for fellowship, and their children participate in the day's activity.
The kids come here. First we pray, and after that we read a piece of Bible.
Today the children discussed Matthew 6:28, and they did some work.
And these works are something like a flower. His face will be the flower, and so we want to do this to tell them that if God takes care of birds or flowers, He will take care of us.
A few minutes away at Sacred Heart Church, we met with the only priest working with Iraqis in Jordan.
Maybe under Saddam Hussein regime, the Christian, it was fine. We don't have this persecution, systematic systemation. But now we have troubles. We have 5 governments in Iraq. Maybe Sunni, Shia, Kurdi, and American groups, and I don't know who is the government in Iraq now. Now in these 3 months, arrive about 200, 300 families now in this parish. We still to be danger for all people, not only Christian, for all people of Iraq.
Despite their hardships, God is working through Father Musali and through the Franciscan sisters to provide and protect His beloved people of Iraq. So those were some Iraqi refugees that we met in Jordan. Now, again, my impression was that there are a lot of Iraqi refugees in Jordan, and that maybe the situation that Christians in Iraq face might be a little different than in other countries because of the war. Is that correct?
But of course, once again, the invasion in 2003 to take Saddam Hussein out created a vacuum, a political vacuum.
Yes.
And a very deep war and wounds were reopened between the Shiites, the Shiites Muslims, and the Sunni, but also the Sunni are split into the Arab and also the Kurd in the north that have been claiming their piece of the land for a long time. So basically what's been happening for all those years is a war between those three, and within those three are not monolithic either. They have different factions in each one of them.
So the Christians are caught in the middle?
The Christians are cut in the middle. It's very simple.
Yeah.
And the fact that the U.S. forces in particular went in there and actually on the first few months occupied one of the Chaldean seminary in Baghdad, created a false impression that Christians were allowing those mean Christians from the West, to do a job here in Iraq. Yeah. So that compounded with that created a fuel of little groups, a lot of them coming from the outside, coming from Iran, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and who knows where else, to fight the West forces, but also to fight to get power in Iraq for the Sunni. How could the Sunni allow the Shiites to rule an Arab country? This is unheard of.
Yeah.
And so that too was part of this whole complex situation.
And also, to a breakdown in central authority, the dismantling of a military, of a police force. You had a major vacuum and just complete lawlessness. And actually, that's what's happening, more than likely, that's what's happening in Egypt right now.
Well, that's what, when we met Father Raymond Musali, who we saw in the clip,
yes,
who's the sole priest for all the Chaldean Catholics in Jordan,
yes,
he said that under Saddam Hussein, the Christians were better off.
Well,
because there was at least law and order.
They were also a protected minority. Right now it's happening in Syria. In Syria, of course, the Ba'ath Party, which runs that country, is the same party that Saddam Hussein belonged to.
Yeah.
And the Ba'ath Party in Iraq was controlled by Sunni Muslims, who are a minority. In Syria, it's controlled by the Alawi, who are a very small minority. They then seek alliances with other minorities against the majority. So you have some resentment. And folks in Syria that we talk to, Christians, Catholics, are very concerned that if this particular regime tumbles, the same thing that happened in Iraq will happen in Syria, where up until now, relations between Catholics or Christians and Muslims have been very good. In fact, our president, Monsignor Robert L. Stern, on several times was invited to preach the Friday sermon at the principal mosque in Damascus by the Grand Mufti. That is not something that just anybody, it just doesn't always happen. But in Syria, it does.
Yeah.
Think about Christians and something that we as Catholics, I presume most of your viewers are Catholic, but not exclusively.
Yeah.
But Christians in the Middle East have a disproportionate level of influence. Why? Because of religious institutes, religious communities from France, the United States, England, Ireland, over the centuries have established schools, hospitals, different apostolic works. So your Christians speak French, they speak English, they speak Italian, Swedish.
Yeah.
Unlike the majority, who were, for the most part, spoke Arabic and that alone. They're also very well educated. They have connections with the West. So as a result, because of their ties to the West culturally, linguistically, they've had more opportunity to leave, and economic migration.
Right.
Communities in the United States and Canada go back to the late 19th century.
Yeah.
It wasn't persecution; it was economic opportunity.
And let's face it, this whole questions of today is also that Christians have been there since the time of the apostles, right?
Yes,
they are
years.
survivors.
Yeah.
They've known throughout the years. I mean, what's happening now, the storm that's happening now, whether it's within the questioning and division within the Muslim world about their crisis identity, I would call, because that's what they're going through, often is that crisis is fueled on Christians and other minorities in between themselves. But Christians are survivors. And the fact that they allied themselves with, let's say, Saddam Hussein or with the current government in Syria doesn't mean that they approve of the gesture of those. They do it for survival purposes. They are not just a minority like they're from somewhere else. They belong to that society. They were Christians before the Muslims were Muslims. And so they've contributed even more than any other citizens of each one of those countries, and they belong there. For them to leave is like not just leaving from one state to another, is leaving their historical fate behind. That's very, very painful.
In fact,
very painful.
The whole concept of Arab nationalism was founded by Christian Arabs. That's where it started. Even if you look at the founders of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, they were Christians. Yeah. Yes, there are Muslims too, but a significant number were also Christians, Catholics.
Okay, so I think it's fair to say that we're not asking the question because it's not up to us to decide whether they stay or leave, but how do we support them? Because some will leave and some will stay and some will be in danger if they stay. Some are doing great work. So how do we support those who want to stay, and how do we support the ones who choose to come to Canada or the United States?
But look, since the Synod, if you look at what's been happening, and there's been this whole question of Iraqi Christians coming into Canada, for example. Well, many parishes, starting with the Archdiocese of Toronto and then follow up with Edmonton, Calgary, and other dioceses, have welcomed hundreds of Iraqi families, Christians in particular. Yes. And I think one of the beautiful stories is that they've welcomed them in their community, integrated them in their community, and bringing this other dynamic of a Chaldeans, a Syriac. It's new to the local folks, and that's very healthy. At the same time, we all know that that represents only a drop into the wider group of people that will remain behind in our task. And that's the task of CNEWA, actually, to bring that forth, that message to the Canadian public, to say there's a mean to support the Christians that want to stay and the other that cannot leave because they don't have the means to leave.
Right. Or choose not to leave.
And choose not to leave.
There are plenty who absolutely refuse to leave. That's their homeland. I mean, imagine, who wants to leave their home? No one wants to, and most of them, like the Corps, as you point out, when they had the opportunity, they moved back, and they brought their children with them, and they're not leaving anytime soon.
And so the whole approach here, then, okay, they decide to stay. We all know, and church leaders, except for maybe one or two church in the whole Middle East, don't have the means to survive on their own, to provide all the different services. So our task is we have 3 offices over there, one in Beirut, Lebanon, one in Jordan, and one in Jerusalem, covering the Middle East. And through our offices, we're very close to the bishops, the patriarchs, the priests, the religious, the lay leaders, and their organization. And we sit down monthly to look at the needs. And by developing the needs, then we translate that into projects, concrete projects that will help concretely Christians, but not only Christians, also their institutions that interrelate with the majority Muslims or Jewish or what have you. And that's a beautiful kind of work too we're doing.
Pedro, as you and your colleagues saw in our trips in the fall, the churches are, first of all, we as Canadians or North Americans should be and are, I am, very proud of what our churches are doing in the Middle East. Who knew that we had universities? Who knew that we had clinics and refugee camps? Who knew that we had social workers who were nuns and were not only catechizing but really meeting the needs of women who are abused, men who have been victimized in any way? Who knew that we were educating Muslims? It's just mind-boggling. The church does not work in a ghetto or live in a ghetto. No. It is dynamic. It is active.
Present,
It's present, and we should be very proud of what our brothers and sisters are doing. And as my colleague here in Canada is doing across this great country, is animating Canadian Catholics about this, and they can be partners and should be partnering with their diocese and with these churches and these heroes.
Well, that's good. We have to leave it there, but I'm hoping that this will help be part of that animation of our viewers. So if people want to support, it's as easy as going to their website, CNEWA.ca, CNEWA.ca. It's time for us to reflect on our conversation by looking at this Sunday's Gospel. It's from John chapter 14. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. And you know the way to the place where I am going. That's from John chapter 14, verses 1 through 4. Carl, would you like to share a reflection?
Well, I think I was reading a speech from Patriarch 12, and he said, our church in the Middle East is not us versus you in the West. It's the mother church. We're one church. And I think what it says to me is that regardless of where we are, we have to see each other as one, because we're one family under one house. And that for me is very, very important.
Thank you. Michael?
It's interesting. The reading ties in quite nicely with our discussion, because we're talking about nothing is monolithic, that there is great diversity. But Catholic Near East Welfare Association, we publish a magazine called One, and it's really all about one God, one world, one human family, and one church. And in the end, all paths lead through and with Christ to the Father. And it's what our discussion has been about. Yes, it's what you're just referring to, the Patriarch had said, and of course what Christ himself said in that gospel. So it's very applicable. Thank you.
That's true. Well, no, thank you both. We've been speaking with Michael Civita. He's the Vice President Communications for CNEWA, and Carl Hetu is the National Director for CNEWA Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The conversation ends here, but the discussion continues on Facebook, facebook.saltandlighttv.org. And remember, also check our webpage, saltandlighttv.org/perspectives. That's where we post our question of the week. And remember, we cannot do this show without your perspectives. That's all for tonight. Have a great weekend, and may God continue to bless you and your home.